Can we do one for the MLB Network?
We'd love to do an MLB bike, no?
Yeah, that'd be sweet.
I think this is the guy to do it right here, though.
Paul Teutul Jr. is known for his role in the Discovery Channel reality television series American Chopper, which followed the goings-on at Orange County Choppers, a company manufacturing custom motorcycles based in Montgomery, New York State. He was born Paul Michael Teutul on the 2nd of October 1974. His father, Paul John Teutul Sr., was the main creator and designer of the TV series. His mother is Paula Teutul, but his parents divorced, and Paul Sr. went on to marry Beth Ann Dillon in 2007, divorced her in 2015, and is now in a relationship with Joan Kay. Paul has two younger brothers, Daniel, who is the owner of Orange County Iron Works LLC, and Michael, who is also in the TV series. Their younger sister, Kristen, is a nurse who works in Rochester, New York State. Paul Sr. was a member of the U.S. Merchant Marine and is a veteran of the Vietnam War. He battled with addictions until he cleaned up in the mid-'80s. Paul Jr. became a born-again Christian at the age of 12, but the tensions at home led him to suffer addictions too, so that he ended up in rehab at 16. His mother helped him turn his life around, and he's maintained his faith to this day, remaining clean. When he was young, Paul Jr. worked as an apprentice in what was then his father's business, Orange County Ironwork. He was educated at a vocational high school where he learned the art of welding, which by then he was already quite skilled in anyway. Further studies were undertaken through a program run by the Board of Cooperative Educational Services, and after completing his senior school year, he had all the necessary tools and skills to work with his father full-time. Paul started off on the bottom rung of the ladder, with his primary duties being to clean up the shop, sweep the floor, run errands, and generally assist everyone. After he'd proved himself, he was eventually promoted to supervising the railing shop, where his duties were to manufacture and paint railings. Paul Sr. decided that it would be fun to build motorcycles, and when Paul Jr. joined him, he proved to have a natural talent for designing and building mean machines. This led in 1999 to Paul Jr. leaving Orange County Ironworks and to father and son founding Orange County Choppers, OCC, with the idea of building motorbikes that were works of art. After a 2-year period of trial and error, Paul Jr. was able to build a motorbike from scratch, and all that was left was to unleash his creative flair and delve into expanding his design abilities, something that's been an ongoing passion to the present day. It wasn't long before OCC were making their mark amongst the bikers community. Pilgrim Films and Television contacted them with an invitation to launch a reality TV series based on their work, and 6 weeks later, Paul Sr., Paul Jr., and his younger brother Michael were ready to film the pilot episode, which included Rick Petco, Vincent DiMartino, Nick Hansford, and Cody Connolly, technicians and fabricators at Orange County Choppers. 2 episodes in which they built their first custom bike, the Black Widow, were aired on Discovery Channel to gauge the public's reaction. The Teutul's were concerned because the screenings included Paul Sr. and Jr.'s arguments, which they thought may have a negative effect on ratings and on their professional ability as motorcycle assemblers. But to their great surprise, their pilot had the highest rankings of all the TV shows that featured that night. So it was that on the 31st of March 2003, the series American Chopper was launched, which subsequently ran until the 10th of May 2010. Paul and his father appeared in many movies and TV series together. For example, in the 1997 TV show King of the Hill, and in 2005 in My Name is Earl. In 2007, they both acted in the movie Wild Hogs, and over the years they made guest appearances in a variety of TV shows, such as The Daily Show in 2013, Late Night with Conan O'Brien in 2004, and The Late Show with David Letterman in 2007. Paul Jr. and his father always had a tumultuous relationship, and often butted heads. Fans of the show got used to seeing them arguing, swearing, and shouting at each other, but they weren't expecting what happened next. In September 2008, Paul Sr. picked out his son for being late to work, which Paul Jr. had been on several occasions. Defending himself, Paul Jr. shouted that the work gets done by the end of the day anyway, and if he wasn't involved, the place would burn to the ground. With that, he picked up a chair, threw it against the wall, and stormed out, literally throwing his toys. All the cogs and wheels fell off, as TV viewers witnessed Paul Sr. swearing at Jr. and firing him on the spot in front of the other staff. Shortly thereafter, Paul Jr. was served a notice of default for pulling out of the show, but his contract was then modified, and he returned to the show in a different guise, only to leave again in April 2009. While waiting for his one-year non-competing restriction to pass, Paul Jr. put his skills with the acetylene torch to good use by designing and making barbecue road trip grills for Coleman's and taking on some other work. In April 2010, Paul Jr. founded his own company, Paul Jr. Designs, PJD, doing what he does best, building custom choppers. Later, in retrospect, he acknowledged that Paul Sr. had done him a great favor by firing him, as Paul Jr. was happy to be away from the toxic relationship he had with his father, and felt that he was able to have fun for the first time. More importantly, he was able to put his creative talent to good use, going on to design state-of-the-art motorcycles and expanding into creating branded merchandise such as clothing and accessories for motorcyclists. Yet it wasn't the last of American Chopper, and Paul was impelled to give it another shot. So on the 12th of August 2010, American Chopper Senior vs. Junior premiered on the TLC channel. As the title denotes, this reality TV spin-off spotlights the tensions and animosities between Paul Sr. and his company OCC and Paul Jr.'s newly opened business, PJD. Discovery Channel jumped on the bandwagon, realizing that their fans were revved up to see the outcome of the legal battle father and son were fighting at the time. Paul Sr. tried to force Paul Jr. to literally give his 20% share of OCC back to him, but after a 14-month court battle, Paul Jr. was the victor. During that time, in 2011, American Chopper Live, the build-off, saw the two adversaries and their companies competing. Some former OCC employees, including Cody Connolly, joined PJD, and in December 2012, the special feature, Chopper Live: The Revenge, was launched, filmed at the Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas, with Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. being part of the cast. Subsequently, American Chopper Senior vs. Junior aired 67 episodes over 4 seasons, with more sparks flying, being canned in 2012, but the bad blood between them remained. In his personal life, Paul Jr. married model and actress Rachel Beaster on the 10th of August 2010. They had met on the set when Rachel featured in the episode of American Chopper, entitled McCuff Gas Tank Protector. Before their wedding, Paul Jr. and Rachel made an appearance in the TV show Say Yes to the Dress. Rachel was assisted in choosing her perfect bridal dress, and Paul Jr., who was more of a casual denim and leathers man, got a custom-made suit. The couple married in a boathouse chapel on the Bonnet Island Estate Beach in New Jersey. Even though they had rarely spoken to nor seen each other, Paul Jr. invited his father, who chose not to show up. Paul Jr. and Rachel have one child, Hudson Seven Tuttle, who was born on the 3rd of February 2015. Rachel was born on the 19th of June 1985 in Los Angeles, California. The now 36-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyed model became the vice president of Paul Jr. Designs. In 2019, Rachel opened a fashion, clothing, accessories, and gift shop in the Hudson Valley called Oliver Ann Boutique. The family currently resides in Montgomery. To everyone's surprise, the father and son team were persuaded to resurrect their show despite not having spoken a civil word to each other for years. Hence, American Chopper, the reboot, aired on Discovery Channel from March 2018, but only for 2 seasons until March 2019. The upside is that it gave father and son sufficient time to bury the hatchet and make peace with one another. They appeared together once again in a 2-hour special on the 4th of August 2020, which was the final curtain for American Chopper, unless they spring another surprise on viewers. Paul Jr. has some famous theme bikes in his showroom. From the first one he ever brought out, the black and yellow Anti-Venom bike, and the original black and red Black Widow from the American Chopper series, which both sport a spiderweb design, to a great selection of mean machines. The Spider-Man bike changed hands a couple of times before he got it back. There's a Jets bike and Build-Off 1 and 2. The Yankees bike, built when the series relaunched, enabling father and son to reunite after it had been trashed. Paul Jr. bought it back at auction. The Sapphire and Blue Chrome QUBX bike was created on the set of Senior vs. Junior, but it took Paul Jr. 7 years to get it back. In 2014, 2 teams from PJT conceptualized and assembled 2 Azeroth choppers. The Horde bike, rough and ready with thick tires, the fork being 2 simulated ivory tusks and back tractor wheels, and the Alliance bike, which was sleek, chrome, and glitz, with front and back tractor tires for opposing factions of Blizzard Entertainment's online multiplayer game, World of Warcraft. In 2016, Paul Jr. appeared in the movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Out of the Shadows, and 2 bikes which he designed and built for the characters Rocksteady and Bebop had star roles as well. The Rocksteady bike sports a rhino horn and is rough and ready, with 2 rocket grenade projectiles. The Bebop bike is gold and black with spiked tire rims. Paul Jr. entered into a licensing deal whereby he kept the bikes and he gets a cut on the toys of the bikes that are manufactured. Paul Jr.'s personal favorite is the motorbike that was built for the MLB network, which was won by a couple, but which he later bought back from them. He feels the MLB bike is the leanest, cleanest, most streamlined, and aesthetically pleasing bike on the floor. In 2017, Paul Jr. published a personal memoir entitled The Build: Designing My Life of Choppers, Family, and Faith. The book has a 4.5-star rating on Amazon and is a candid account of his stormy life at home and battles with his father, while incredible bikes were being built amid laughter, outrageous antics, and shouting matches. Paul Jr. also revealed how he found God and how faith has pulled him through the tough times. In the book, Paul Jr. calls his father a monster, but as the years have gone by, he's made his peace with the situation. As quoted in the New York Post on the 3rd of June 2020, Paul Jr. stated, "My intention is maybe to do another project with Senior or multiple projects. Life is short. What can we do to make things good inside the family and get together?" In addition to his passion and profitable work building luxury motorbikes, Paul Jr. has launched PJD Studios, offering logo designs for print, digital applications, and corporate branding, as well as promotional and marketing services. They now have offices in New York and Los Angeles. Paul Jr. is super excited about the new building they are busy constructing in Long Beach Island, New Jersey, which will have a showroom, offices, a space for Rachel, and apartments upstairs. PJD has recently entered into a collaboration with the bicycle manufacturing company Rough Cycles, based in Regensburg, Germany. Paul Jr. designed an electric bicycle inspired by the Build-Off 2 bike, with white-walled, red-rimmed tires, the number 7 logo, pinstripes and logos, and is called the PJD-E Ruffian. But that's not all. Paul Jr. is not going to be stepping on the brakes anytime soon. In fact, he's going full throttle. And his latest venture is the Paul Jr. Podcast, which premiered on the 9th of September 2001. With his podcast, he aims to bring his audience items of interest, such as the 2nd and 3rd podcast featuring the Firearms Research Institute, where the problem of veteran suicides was discussed. The Institute's suicide hotline receives 725,000 phone calls per annum. Paul Jr., now 47 years old, is a legendary name in the world of luxury motorbikes and has a huge fan base plus a large following on social media. With 220,000 on Instagram, 1.4 million on Facebook, almost 160,000 on Twitter, and about 45,000 subscribers to his YouTube channel. He makes appearances at public events as a speaker and for signing autographs. So overall, according to Celebrity Net Worth, his modest fortune is over $2 million as of mid-2022. Paul Sr. hasn't done so well and is in debt and apparently still fighting several legal battles. Paul Jr. might have had a rough ride over the years, but right now, his businesses are thriving and he's more focused on his family and building a good relationship with his son, unlike the challenging relationship he endured with his father. He never understood why his father constantly competed with him and never supported him. And it's important for him to bring up his son to be better than that. He declares that he's blessed with Rachel as a wife, who held his hand and steered him along the correct path through the tough times. His family inspires him to be the best he can be. He knows God watches over him and that he is the source of all his creativity, and that the secret of success is to simply keep moving forward. Well, according to his track record, Paul Jr. has his pedal to the metal and is still going places at quite a speed. Thank you for spending some time with us. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss another video. We also handpick these videos which we recommend you watch next. You can talk to us on all social medias or ask a question in the comments below. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you back tomorrow.